Welcome to episode 161 of Beyond the Rut, the weekly podcast about inspiring you to make your own path and live the life you've always dreamed of, beyond the rut. I'm one of your hosts, Jerry Dugan, and in just a moment, Brandon Cunningham is going to join us as we have a conversation with Jim McNeal. Jim is with a company called the Arbinger Institute, and they help leaders and organizations get out of their own rut of being inward and self-focused. They help break down silos and all of this around the concept of changing mindset. Not so much focused on behaviors, but mindset. And that's really an odd direction for companies to take, because how do you measure mindset? Well, you actually kind of measure it through results. So sit back and relax unless you're driving. In that case, keep your head on a swivel as we have a conversation with Jim about how this approach towards mindset is what is making the difference in companies around the world. Here we go. All right, Brandon, welcome back. And are you trying to floss?
I'm flossing like the cool dad I am.
All right. My kids shake their heads when I try. I'm like, am I doing it? Am I doing it? And they're like, no, Dad, stop, please, please. And my daughter, she dances. So
yeah,
she's got a high standard for how well I can dance and not dance. And apparently I don't measure up anymore. So, something about being 15 and good. I don't know. All right. So Brandon, we've got a special guest calling in from the Washington, D.C. area, Jim McNeal. He's with the Arbinger. Let me say that without the
Arbinger.
I have not had enough coffee. Anyway, from the Arbinger Institute, he's one of the consultants there, and I've met him through, a chain of events. I went to a conference in May. It was with the Association for Talent Development. And while I was looking through I was on a swag hunt. I was looking for like all the goodies that all the vendors were giving away. And then I stepped into what I thought was the bridge of the USS Enterprise. It was like awesome. the coolest booth. And I'm just standing in this circle and I look up like, are aliens going to take me away now? And then like one of the reps came up to me and said, hey, can I help you? And I realized I was at a conference inside somebody's booth, like in their workspace. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I was just admiring the booth. Like you got like, it's a very distinct booth. Like I felt like I crossed a threshold. She goes, yeah, we did that on purpose. Like we're trying to win I guess it was a competition and we're trying to win. So they took my name down. They gave me a book called The Outward Mindset. And they got my information in exchange for that. And normally, like I'm getting the book. I'm like, okay, I'll read this someday. I actually read this book on the plane ride back to Texas. And I'm a slow reader, like 20 pages an hour kind of thing. And this flight was a 3-hour flight. I was almost done with the book by the time we landed. And I was just amazed by it. And I was like, this is such a simple yet important step. And so hard for us to implement about thinking outwardly. And a few weeks later, Jim calls because that's his job. And he's supposed to ask what could he do for our company. And we tried to set up some meetings with our leadership to see if this is something we could fit into our learning strategy. And sometimes I'm just way ahead of the curve, or sometimes I'm behind because it turns out we were going with another consultant already. And I was like, oh man. But I didn't want to waste this connection. And Jim was like, well, are you saying you want me on the show? And I was like, yeah. So
what really happened was he called and said, can I be on the show? And then you said, well, I got this other thing going, but yeah, do the show.
So anyway, as the recipient of the longest introduction ever, Jim McNeal, welcome to the show.
Good morning, guys, and it's a great pleasure to be here. And Jerry, I have not given up on you yet, so don't think this is the end of it. This is only the beginning.
Yeah, I haven't given up either. That book was again just that little thing. If I look at 2018 and what was the biggest shift for me, it was that one little thing, and I was already servant minded to begin with. Mm-hmm. But this helped me one up my game a whole lot, and people have noticed. And
as soon as he got that book, Jim, he messaged me because we work about 100 yards apart in separate buildings, and he said, "Hey, you come get this book and read it." So that, and sadly, I've not gotten all the way through it, but it is sitting on my dresser there to grab.
If I were your teacher, you'd be getting a big F right now. Repeat this grade.
Couldn't find the Cliff Notes for those of you that are over 30 years old.
Well, Brandon, can I brag about Jerry for a second?
Absolutely.
Is that allowed on the show?
Sure.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll cut it out later, so go right ahead.
Yeah, we'll edit this out. But So Jerry did come to our booth and at ATD in San Diego, and when my boss hears you're raving about the booth, he will be very, very excited because he put a lot of time and effort into this. And not only was it a great booth, but we paid a premium to be, right in the entrance. And we actually did win the best booth,
Awesome.
but we had a lot of people that we talked to. And as Jerry said, when you get a lead at a trade show, you follow up with it and, different various levels of success. And it took me a while. I think Jerry's contact information may have fallen through the cracks a little bit because it wasn't immediately after the show. It was several months later. And when I heard Jerry's story, it was absolutely unreal because we do train people and educate people on the benefits of having an outward mindset compared to an inward mindset. And I'm sure we'll get to that during the episode. But most people will have to go through our training, our specific training, couple days training, and they read the book and they say usually, hey, that's pretty interesting stuff, and I would like to learn more, and I would like to go to a workshop, and I would like to maybe bring an Arbinger consultant in to work with my team. But Jerry did something that I have not heard really anybody do, at least in my tenure at Arbinger, and that is Jerry just took the concepts in the outward mindset and actually just started doing it. Didn't wait to talk to anybody from Arbinger, didn't go to one of our events, just started being outward. And one of the challenges that we have as individuals is how do we influence people around us? How do we do that? Because you can't influence people. You can't tell people what to do. All you can do is really lead by example. And when I talked to Jerry that first time, and it really made my day was the fact that he implemented the Arbinger principles to the point where people were coming to him and saying, hey, Jerry, what's different about you? Why are you doing it this way? And that is so fantastic that Jerry would do that. And like I said, I think that I'm not giving up on, trying to do some work with the folks at his organization, because he's living proof that, it can change. If it can change one person, it can change more than one person. It's, there was a person I heard say one time that, as far as a faith and being a Christian, if you were arrested for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you?
Absolutely. That is
right?
a really great question. I challenge people on that all the time.
And I think, and so if you say you're a Christian and nobody says, oh, really, you're a Christian? Then you're probably not living that Christian life. And it's the same thing with being outward. And it's just fantastic that Jerry, took the book and actually, and in fact, if everybody did what Jerry did, we'd only be a book company.
There you go. Yep.
We wouldn't have any need for any of our consultants or anything. But yep. I did want to brag about Jerry, and I would love, I'd love for him to tell just a little bit, and I'll. See, I've kind of taken over the podcast. So, Jerry, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you implemented. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. We've never had him on a show as a guest, so
has become the interviewee. So when I
got
read
a
that
new
book,
co-host, his name is Jim.
I got replaced already. Well, it took you 3 years, man.
No, we'll do the 3-man booth like Monday Night Football.
Oh,
hey,
yes.
there you go.
Oh man. So yeah, when I read the book, some of the concepts that really stood out from the outward mindset and the context around what was going on at this time was, so I'm attending this conference in early May. I had just been promoted maybe 2 weeks prior, maybe a week prior to a manager role. And the role included, program management of learning programs that our team had. And so now I'm supporting a team of like 12 consultants who go out and facilitate training. They have logistical needs. They have the need to have consistent, updated materials in time with training to know how to roll it out, all that good stuff. Some things that we were trying to do, but we couldn't really hone in and do. And then we also had 2 coordinators that their role was to support all of those 12 consultants. However, when we were digging deeper, it turns out they were really barely able to support one, or they were only supporting one. And so there were like 10 others not being supported. And then so our coordinators were also kind of getting burned out, not challenged, all that stuff. So I read this book and I'm thinking, this is us. This is where my team of 3 comes into play because we just got formed. We don't know what the work is going to look like. We've got consultants who are frustrated. We've got a team of folks that need help so they can do their best. They want to do their best. There were just needs that they weren't having met. And then there were needs that our team needed so that we weren't going to be burned out. And then there were needs that my boss had and her boss had. And then our customers, the guys receiving the training had. And I was just like, before I read the book, I was thinking, how am I going to pull this off? What am I supposed to do? Because we're basically creating this wheel, and how do we create it? How do we roll it out? How do we get it accepted as something of value? And then I read that book. I'm like, oh yeah, this is how. And it was just, it's a simple concept, but it's kind of like Mozart. Mozart's easy to play, hard to master. Kind of the same thing. The concept is simple, but to master it, you got to actually do it. You got to do it consistently. And it just, there are a series of diagrams, and it was really just boiling down to, who is your customer? Boom. What are the objectives of your customer? Like, what do they need? And then what do I have that can help supply that need? So
when you read a lot, and you read this kind of genre a lot, as I do too, but what made you want to read this book? What kind of caught you? Well,
it has a great hook at the beginning. Most books tell you about like this person who made sales increase, or, they try to challenge you like, doesn't your life suck? Well, read our book and it won't suck. This thing opened up with something that hit my heart, and it was the Kansas City SWAT team, and that they had just done a raid. It was a drug bust, and the living room is filled with mothers who have crying babies, and then you've got this officer from the SWAT team just scrounging around through the house looking frantically for some white powder. He finds some, but it's not the white powder they were actually kicking the doors down to find. It was formula for the babies. And so he finds the formula, he mixes it in bottles and hands it out to the mothers to feed their babies. And all of a sudden the babies all got quiet. And because this officer who, just kicked down their door and seized them at gunpoint, to find, they captured the 2 drug dealers. They're looking for the drugs, but because they calmed the babies down, like, it was a nice calm scene. The mothers now had a connection with the SWAT team. Like, hey, these guys are good guys. Yeah, they're the drug dealers. This is where you'll find the drugs. Exactly. I'm paraphrasing the story, but I was just like, that is so different than what you would expect from a SWAT team. And they say it. This is so opposite. 3-4 years ago, this wouldn't be rational behavior to frantically look for formula. This would be something irrational. We go have that guy's head checked. And it was that servant attitude at a situation where you wouldn't expect it, in a scenario you wouldn't expect it, that achieved the results they were hoping for, which was a very cooperative set of witnesses, finding the drugs, nabbing the bad guys, and then taking the right people off to jail with the right evidence and all that good stuff. And I was, now my team is not the SWAT team. we're more logistics folks. But because of that, I was able to expand really like, who are all my customers? So number one, I've got these 2 people reporting to me who are depending on me to provide them with a safe place to work, that they have the tools they need, that they have the process in place to do their job, that they have parameters in place so they can make their own decisions confidently, have support. So if somebody's complaining, that I take the brunt of that, and then, give them the communication and the feedback without the attack. And so there were all these things that they needed. And so I looked at what did they need? And then I looked at, okay, who do we serve primarily? Great. It was these consultants. And so what are they complaining about? And I didn't know. So it forced me to do a round of, interviewing with them. Like, what's working well, what isn't, what do you wish you had as far as support, all that stuff, asking all those questions. And they gave me this feedback. And this went on for about 2 to 3 weeks. And my boss is asking me, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? I'm like, all right, what does she need? Cause she's also a customer. So she needs answers right now. So I'll give her that, but I'll also let her know this is where I'm going. Give me about a month. This is what I hope to have in place, and propose this to the team to see if they accept it. Propose it to you to see if you accept it, before I propose it to the team. And so
before we go into full implementation, Jim, why don't you tell us how you kind of came to this concept of this outward mindset of the servant kind of manager?
Well, this is something that our founder, Terry Warner, came up with, and he was doing research. He's basically a philosopher, and came into this problem of self-deception. And what we really found with self-deception is oftentimes we blame others for things that we are doing. And I mean, it really is, as Jerry said, a very, very simple concept, very, very difficult to implement, because with the self-deception piece, we end up justifying our bad behavior because of what we perceive to be other people doing things to us, when in fact other people aren't doing anything to us.
Right.
And we're just interpreting things that they're doing and then justifying our bad behavior with that. And so Terry was basically just teaching this course, and he had he had various students, and all of a sudden people started coming to Terry and just saying, hey, could you help us with this? Could you help us with this? And Terry just felt, hey, I'm not really, I'm not a business person. I don't know how to kind of do what they want me to do. So he went to some of his former students and said, hey, I think there might be something that we could put together here that could help people. And so so we got a few of his former students together, and they formed Arbinger. And really, it's been an unbelievable place to work. We're growing and growing and growing. We just closed our fiscal year on November 30th yesterday, and we had our highest revenue we've ever had, which was well over what we had last year, which was our highest revenue we ever had. So there's a hunger out there, I think, for this idea of having an outward mindset and the benefits that we can have an outward mindset. And again, I don't want to beat the dead horse, but what Jerry did and implemented just by reading the book is pretty remarkable. But when we talk about an outward mindset, since we've thrown that term around, we're really talking about the difference between having an inward mindset and an outward mindset. And when you have an inward mindset, you're really focused on yourself, and you're really focused on what we call your inside triangles. And that doesn't mean you're a bad person, because if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, we wouldn't have survived as a species if we weren't worried about taking care of ourselves first.
Right.
But we're not most people in the world are not, in a life-to-death struggle every single day. Certainly not in the United States, for sure.
Right.
So with an inward mindset, though, you're focused on yourself. With an outward mindset, which we all should be striving towards, an outward mindset is where we view people as people. We're alive to their humanity. Their needs and challenges are just as valid as my needs and challenges. And as Jerry said, the good news, bad news, as I like to say it, is the good news is the concept of an outward mindset is very, very simple, and it doesn't take a whole book to describe it. The challenge is living it on a day-to-day basis. And so when we do our two-day workshops developing and implementing an outward mindset, there's always a little bit of a perception that when you go to our 2-day workshop, you come in inward and you leave outward. I always use the analogy, the Dr. Seuss analogy, with the Sneetches and the stars on their bellies. You don't walk in without a star and walk out with a star.
Right.
It's all it does is show you really how much work you have to do, because it's an ongoing journey. and it's an ongoing process. But what our 2-day workshop helps people is, first of all, understand what it is to be outward, how it manifests itself in all aspects of our life. Any interaction you have with another human being, you're going to have the opportunity to have an outward mindset towards that person or an inward mindset. So the first day talks about that. The second day talks about, okay, now we all agree we want to be outward. So how do we do that? What are some of the things that we can do? How do we rewire our brain?
Right.
So one of the ways that you can discover, or you can kind of realize you're being inward, and we call it being in the box, is when you view people as objects. And when you view people as objects, you view them as either obstacles in your way, vehicles that I can use, or they're simply irrelevant to me. And I think as human beings, we probably feel like we've all been one of those. We've either just been someone views us as an obstacle, or someone views us as a vehicle. I mean, I think we've all been told, hey, that's all fine, that's all great, but you know what, I just need you to do this, right? You're just being a vehicle, or simply just invisible. And when and I think people realize, hey, when you feel that way, it doesn't feel good. And the behavior that you start to go back towards that other person, just escalates into what we call collusion, where you have two people in the box towards one another. So
right.
A great example of someone who's when you're viewing someone as an object, and I'll have to give my wife credit for this because this is her example, and I use it all the time because it's very, very common to everybody, is when we're in a traffic jam and we need to get somewhere, we do not view the other people in the cars as anything other than objects, right?
Absolutely.
If you're sitting there, why are there so many people on the road? They're just obstacles in my way to get to wherever I'm going. I'm going to be late for my movie now.
Yeah.
It doesn't even occur to you that the person in front of you may be going to the hospital to visit their mother that's dying.
Right.
Which is a little bit more important reason to be on the road.
Exactly.
Yet we are objectifying those people. And by objectifying those people, we're not alive to their humanity, and we don't really care what their needs and challenges are. And as I said, very, very simple concept, very, very, very difficult to do. And it truly is a journey.
It's one of those things too. I have a good friend who's a waitress, and she will talk sometimes about people being rude to their waitress or whatever. And she always approaches it from the standpoint of she doesn't know what you came in with. Maybe you just lost your job, or maybe your kid just got, arrested or is struggling, and you're projecting that on her. It's not about her. It's not personal. But her job is to treat you like a person regardless of how you treated her, and kind of turning that around. I try to do that, and I'm just as bad as anybody else in traffic, but I try to think about that person that cut me off or is racing down the road. They may be going to the hospital or late for work, and they've been late 3 times, and this one will cost them their job or whatever. You don't know what other people are going through.
Absolutely. And what you said, Brandon, was really the epiphany I had, because I was a customer of Arbinger. I was in charge of an organization in the military, and I got our first book, Leadership and Self-Deception. I got it as a Christmas present for a young man that worked for me. And when I read it, and I read it on an airplane, that we were on a trip together, and as soon as we got off the plane, I went to him. I said, "So why would you give me this book? Am I this awful person? Is that why you gave me this book?" And he said, no, sir. I just thought it was a good book. No, not about you. You're not in the box. And of course I was in the box.
Yeah, it's
right?
fiction.
That's why I reacted that way. And so I kind of started to internalize it, not like Jerry did, maybe elementary school level, since Jerry internalized it at the PhD level. Okay.
Yeah.
But I kind of got it a little bit. And so several months later, we were having a retreat, executive offsite, and I said, "Hey, I don't know what Arbinger is. I can't spell it practically, but can you call these dudes and find out what's up? See if they can come out and do an event for us." So he called them, and one of our partners came out, Jim Farrell, who's one of original Terry's students. And Jim, went through our 2-day workshop and took our team through it. Well, we got to the point where we were talking about, as you said, Brandon, where, hey, I don't really know what this person is going through. So again, what I said earlier about collusion, this is where you have two people in the box towards each other, and what we call that is collusion, but it's also your chairs are pointed outward. So the metaphor is you're both sitting in chairs, but you're not facing each other. You're facing away from each other. If you can get the visual. Right. So Jim said, so one of the ways that you can do is you can't have a collusion with just one person. So the way you end a collusion is you just turn your chair. You turn your chair towards the other person. And I immediately raised my hand and said, Jim, what about them? What about them? Yep. What are they going to do? They're still doing this. They're still doing that. When are they going to turn their chair? When are they going to turn their chair? And Jim said, it doesn't matter when they turn their chair, because once the collusion is over, isn't it better than it was? And that was that hit me like a ton of bricks, because that was always my thing when I was in a lot more in personal relationships and in business relationships. Okay, well, I'll apologize, but you got to apologize first.
Exactly.
Right? How we've all had those conversations
in sixth grade.
Yeah, but it's that was really the epiphany for me of how powerful our stuff is. And you're absolutely right. In the waitress example is a great one. And Brandon, I'm gonna steal that from you when I talk to clients, and I'm not going to give you any credit for it. So just to let you know.
Absolutely.
But that's great. That is absolutely great. Because you're right. You have no idea what that person's bringing to the table.
Right.
You have no idea what they went through. And if you're just alive to their humanity, alive to the needs and challenges, and there's so many people out there that on one hand, it's terrible to be viewed as an object, or it's terrible to be viewed as a vehicle that someone can use. But isn't the worst of those three things to just be absolutely ignored, or not even observed, or no one cares about you, just irrelevant? Is there a worse feeling than feeling irrelevant?
And I think definitely as a manager or a leader of any kind, to understand that you're there to serve the people that are under you, not the other way around. And I say that a lot to my staff. I have a staff of about 11 or 12, and I always say, understand, I'm here for you. My job is to make sure you can do your job with everything you need. Like Jerry said, I need to make sure you've got the resources and the capabilities and the access to what you need. So technically, I work for you. And if we approach it with that mindset, it empowers the people under you to come to you and tell you, hey, I need a hammer, or I need a door opened, or I need an email returned, or whatever it is. And you adopt that mindset. They will do way more for you than you could ever push them to do.
Well, absolutely. And servant leadership, I don't know how familiar you are with Robert Greenleaf's work, but he was the one in 1970 that came up with this concept of servant leadership. Right. And you're absolutely right. And I'm an adjunct professor in San Diego before I left, and I taught a course at Point Loma Nazarene University in leadership. And when we talked a lot about servant leadership, we talked about transformational leadership, we talked about all sorts of different leadership styles. And when I think about servant leaders, when you think about Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, that to me is the most extreme example of servant leadership that there ever was. Because as you guys know, back 2,000 years ago, when you're trudging down these roads in the Middle East with no shoes, the feet had to be pretty bad. Right. And for Jesus to wash the feet of his disciples is an unbelievable story. I always would tell my students, what would you say if you walked into your job tomorrow and your boss said, hey, Joe, take your shoes off. I'm going to wash your feet, right? You think that's pretty strange. Well, it was obviously pretty strange back then as well. But to your point, Brandon, absolutely, this is a lot to do with servant leadership, and it's how can I be helpful, and really it's focusing in Arbinger lingo on the outside triangles of other people.
Right.
And oftentimes we don't aren't alive to the outside triangles because simply we just don't ask.
Right.
As you said, what do you need? What do you need in order to be successful?
And also
it may be or what can I do differently in order to help you? Because as a boss, sometimes you say, wow, look at all this stuff I'm doing for my people. I'm a great servant leader because I'm working for them and I'm doing all this stuff. But do you go to them and say, hey, I'm doing X. Is that helpful?
Right.
Because sometimes they'll just say, not really. What would really be helpful is if you did this.
Absolutely.
But we have to ask the question, and that is, again, being curious about other people, being alive to their humanity, and really just loving people. And if I think it's difficult to be a servant leader, and it's difficult to have an outward mindset if you don't like people.
Yeah, that's totally true. You can't fake that because it's too hard. But from a practical standpoint, like if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, okay, the whole Jesus part, that's great, but I don't really want to be a servant. Take it from this standpoint. It is so much more conducive to productivity if you serve your staff, because if you're serving them, they're going to return that. They're going to serve your customers. They're going to serve their other fellow staff members. They're going to develop that mindset. So even if your concept is, I just want a company that makes money, I want my staff to work harder. Think about how much time you've put in the last 6 months to a year or whatever you've been pushing your team and not accomplishing this. What if you developed or adopted this mindset of I'm going to serve them? Because just like you said, Jim, maybe I'm giving them, I made sure my team had all the pens in the world they wanted, but I never asked, would you guys want a pencil? And then you'd be shocked for them to go, yeah, we hate pens. That's why we always want pencils.
Well, let's talk about a real live business example that's very, very common, and that's and I had just had this discussion yesterday actually about silos. Because what happens in a lot of businesses is everybody's very, very busy. Everybody's very lean. Even in with the economy now, I think it's the first time we've had more open jobs than actual workers to fill them. So most companies are understaffed. They're lean, and everybody's generally speaking very conscientious, very hardworking. And unfortunately, that really drives a silo mentality of, hey, I've got a lot to do, and I don't have time to worry about you. And that's how we get silos. And so when you get silos, you get lack of collaboration. And one of the things that we do with an outward mindset, and one of the reasons that a lot of training fails, because one of the big complaints about training is it doesn't stick, right? Hey, I went to this great training and it was good for a little while, but didn't stick. Well, that's primarily because a lot of training, there's a lot of great training out there. Jerry went to ATD, and there's a lot of wonderful stuff that was in the convention center, but it's all very behavioral-based training. So in other words, okay, here's a result. We want a different result. So as a different result, we're going to change our behavior. Problem is, behavior change is by definition really only temporary. And we call it the rubber band effect. You pull the rubber band, and you can hold that rubber band for a long time, but eventually it's going to snap back.
Right.
But if you change the mindset and you change the underlying mindset, then the behavior change can be permanent. So again, back to our examples of silos and collaboration. Let's say that Jerry and I were department heads in an organization. And let's say I was HR and Jerry was IT. Couldn't find two more different groups of people, right?
Right.
And they said, hey, you guys aren't collaborating very well. And Brandon, you're our boss. And you say, Jerry, Jim, you guys got to collaborate better. Okay? And Jerry and I are both thinking, you know what? I'm so busy, but my boss tells me to do it, I'm going to do it. So we say, hey, let's get together once a week for a meeting where we're going to collaborate. And so we do that. And we have some wins. We have some collaboration, but we're still while we're sitting in these meetings together, we're both thinking, man, my work's piling up. Man, these emails are coming in. Man, I got to get this project done. So we're still doing it. We're doing outward behavior, but we're still doing it from an inward mindset.
Absolutely.
So this goes on for a little while. And then Jerry's going to call me one day and say, hey, do you mind if we cancel the meeting this week? I've got this big project I got to get out, and I just don't have time for this. I'm actually happy because I got a lot going on too. Yeah, no problem. We'll get it up next week. And then next week I call Jerry and say, hey, I just had this pop-up meeting. I've got to do this. Do you mind if we kick it to next week? Sure. And as you can see, it spirals from there. And now this behavior change of being collaborative has now fallen by the wayside, and we've gone right back into our silos. But compare that to if Jerry and I were outward and we approach it from an outward mindset. And I came to work every day saying, wonder how I can be helpful to Jerry and his team. My number one goal, or one of my number one goals, is to be as helpful as I can possibly be to Jerry and his team, to find out what they need, to give them the resources, and I'm going to judge my success by how successful they are. And Jerry does the same thing with me. I want to find out about Jim and his people. How can I be helpful to them? And we're going to define our success by how successful they are. Would we have to be told by Brandon to collaborate, or would we just be collaborating naturally and organically through being outward towards one another?
Well, it would come naturally.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've seen this scenario too, to the extreme of, because it happened once at a place I worked. They left the meeting on the calendar so their boss would see they're still meeting, but they just started blowing it off, and they probably didn't meet for the last 6 weeks before their boss caught on to it.
There you go. Exactly. And so that's, when we go out and talk to people, and when we were at ATD where we met Jerry, and people say, oh, look at all your competition in here. Well, what I say is we don't have any competition. I have not met any company that says that hey, we're advocating an inward mindset. I think we all understand it's an outward mindset, and one of the things that our research has shown is that if you approach training with an outward mindset, it's going to be 4 times more effective than it was if you don't have an outward mindset.
Yeah.
So everything that we do, if we can approach all of our issues and problems and training, everything we do as a company or an organization or a family, that's one of the great things about the outward mindset is it's applicable to any personal relationship you have. If you approach it from an outward mindset, it's going to be that much more deeper, that much more enriching, and eventually that much more successful. But it is difficult to do.
Right. I would totally agree. It applies to every situation, from a business to a church to a neighborhood, because we've all at some point thought, why is he mowing his yard at 8:00 on a Saturday morning? He's doing it just to irritate me, and so it applies to your neighborhood too. Chances are that might be his only day off, and he's getting all kinds of grief because his yard's not mowed. So he's probably not thinking about you while he's doing this.
And that's the self-deception piece. And then when we have the bad behavior back, that's where we get into the justification, and that's where it really kind of spirals out of control, and it can be very, very damaging. So one of the things that I love about Arbinger and our work, and you mentioned it as far as being applicable in any relationship. We have, through our work, we'll do it mostly through companies and organizations, but we have seen marriages saved. We've seen families reconciled. We have seen personal relationships repaired through what is ostensibly business training. And that, to me, is such a wonderful benefit of doing it. I have not seen anybody go through, nothing wrong with Lean Six Sigma training and green belt and black belt and this sort of thing, but I've never seen someone come home and say, hey guys, I had some great training in Lean Six Sigma, so we're going to run our household. We're going to do a green belt project on how to do the dishes. Yeah, okay. I've not seen that.
Probably a bad idea.
Yeah. But we have seen one of the things we do, and this is a little spoiler alert if anybody listening ever goes to one of our 2-day workshops, but one of the things that they do at the very end, the facilitator typically will say, okay, so everybody has a homework assignment. And of course, everybody, okay, nope, it's easy. All you need to do is find somebody in your life, business, personal, church, whatever it is, and just get really, really curious about them and just and ask them questions and just really get curious about them. And so the next morning, everybody comes in and, hey, I hope everybody had a good night. Okay, so let's talk about the homework assignment. And of course, 90% of the eyes go to the ground, right? Don't call on me, don't call on me, don't call on me, right? That's typically how it goes. But there's always a couple people that have done it, and the facilitator will say, okay, I'd like to, can anybody like to share what they discovered? And that is my favorite part of our 2-day events, because there's invariably at least one person who shares an unbelievably personal story. One that recently happened was I went home and I talked to my 15-year-old daughter, and this was a dad. I talked to my 15-year-old daughter, and we had a conversation. We talked for 2 hours. I haven't had a conversation like that with her for 3 years.
Wow. That's great.
And as the guy went on, I mean, there was some dirt in the room and some dust, because there was a lot of eye rubbing and some sniffling going on, because it was an incredible story. Yeah. Just by getting curious about, your child. Right. It's unbelievably powerful stuff.
And the only criticism I would have there is when I did that with Rob Lowe, he blocked me on Twitter. So it didn't work out quite as good with me, but I can see why that would be huge benefit to other people.
That reminds me, we didn't do the icebreaker. We asked Jim's advice about how to reconnect you to Rob Lowe.
True story. I am actually blocked by Rob Lowe. I don't know why yet, but I had a guy yesterday. I was arguing about politics on Twitter because that's fun for me. He goes, "What does this guy even know? His only claim to fame is being blocked by Rob Lowe on Twitter." And I'm like, well, hey, I told him I stole his girlfriend at Oxford. Maybe that was what it was. I don't know.
I think that's a lie.
Yeah, I'm almost positive that's a lie. So Jim, thanks for just sharing these stories and the book. And what's a great way to get a hold of you if people want to reach out and bring in your organization, or to just find out more about you or find out more about the book?
Well, I'm available all the time. I'll give you my my cell number. That's 619-980-9908, 619-980-9908. Or someone can just send me an email at jmcneal, JMCNEAL, at arbinger.com. It's like Harbinger, but without the H, so ARBINGR.com, or just simply call our office. But we're constantly out there trying to turn the world outward, and that's actually what our mission statement is to turn the world outward. And I don't know how many people in the world there are. There's billions, so we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
But it's what I like to really focus on is the old starfish analogy, which I'm sure you guys have heard. The two guys walking on the beach and see all the starfish, washed up on the beach, thousands of them. And one guy leans down and picks one of the starfish up and throws it back in the ocean. The guy and the other friend says, what? It doesn't even matter. There's thousands. You just saved one. And his friend says, yeah, but it matters to that one.
Exactly.
And that's how we view an outward mindset. So we're trying to get the word out, but every day, if I can get one person like a Jerry or whoever that changes their life by having an outward mindset, then I consider that a great day.
That is a great day. And based on what I'm seeing on social media and the TV, we've got plenty of work to do in the world. So you've got job security for years to come, I would assume. So thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you taking out your time with us today, and we'll make sure all of this is in the show notes. So if you missed any of it because you're driving, you couldn't write it down, you can just go to the website and find out everything you want to know about Jim. And I'm sure once we work this out where you end up with Jerry doing some work, we'll bring you back on and maybe see what else we can learn about Jerry's organization too. So thanks a lot for joining us, and have a great day.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks.
If you like everything you heard in this episode, be sure to check out the show notes at beyondtherut.com/161. There you'll find a link to the Arbinger Institute's website, as well as their 3 books. There is The Outward Mindset, which we talked about in this episode, The Anatomy of Peace, and then one of their bestsellers, Leadership and Self-Deception. We're going to have links for all three of those books in our show notes, so you can just go straight there. And those are affiliate links on Amazon, so when you click on those and you buy on Amazon, you actually support Beyond the Rut. That's us, the show. Now, we're so glad you joined us, and we look forward to joining you next week as we come back with another episode of Beyond the Rut. Till then, you go live life beyond the rut. Take care.